Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to touch an aspect that most of my clients keep asking, and they basically ask me, Gerard, how do the county governments create rates? Because I believe most of us have received an invoice from the county and they wonder, how comes my rates are higher than my neighbor's rates? How do they get to the figure they've given me? Is it just a random number? And today I'm going to delve into it and describe how that is done, because it's basically a legal process that is behind every land rate that is paid within the county levels. Of course, this law is based from the county assembly finance bill that is passed in every year in every county. So today I'm going to decode a bit on how this is calculated and be able to explain why your rates may be higher than your neighbor, or your rates in a particular piece of land in one county is higher or lesser than in your piece of land in a different county. And maybe just to introduce what are rates. Basically, this is a fee that you pay to the county government by virtue of you owning a piece of land in a particular neighborhood. And it's just the same way you pay for your KRA taxes. And of course, the carrier, the national government will calculate that based on different aspects. It may be paying, may be withholding tax. It all depends with what you're paying at the carrier. So it's the same thing at the county level, but basically these are fees that are paid because you own a piece of land within a particular county. Of course, in a different video I've described which parcels of land would meet the ratio to be paid for rates. Of course, we have freehold, we have community land, and we have leasehold land. And most of the time, the lands that you pay for land rates are basically the leasehold type of land ownerships. So let me delve back into the discussion of today and be able to ask ourselves, how are land rates calculated in Kenya? It's basically not a guessing matrix. Of course, there's a matrix that is used. There's a formula that is used within the county government. And today maybe I'll cover on a few aspects, be able to look at the valuation rule. Basically, this is the foundation of charging rates. We'll also look at what is a rating rule. Of course, from the valuation rule, there's a rating rule in terms of the schedule of what is charged on what. And then we'll also look at what it means with site value and market value. These are basically the values that the county government would use when they're calculating the land rates. And then also understand how county governments calculate their rates, and maybe also look at practical examples on how this is done. So in a very summarized way, I will not get into technical details, is now start with the valuation rule. What is a valuation rule? Basically, this is an official record of all the rateable properties and their values within a particular county. Of course, it starts at the sub-county level, where the sub-county planner, through the valuer's office or the rating office, they maintain a record of all properties that are rateable. Of course, how they maintain this record is by virtue of you as an individual being able to register for rates payment. And from that registration of rate payments, of course, they keep a roll and a record of all the properties within a particular sub-county that is rateable. So in the previous videos, I encourage people to register for rates, because it's a prerequisite process of making sure that you own that particular piece of land, and establishing that you are actually a present owner. Because in our country, we have a situation whereby in a court of law, one of the aspects is looked when there is a dispute. The judge will look who is the present owner, or who has been the present owner of that particular land, and what are the details that you need to have, or what are the details that the county government have in that role. Of course, they log in the property owner, so they capture your details, may it be your personal names as per the title, or may it be a company. Of course, that record is put in there. Of course, they capture the plot number. here I'm looking at the LL numbers, your parcel number. Of course, it must read in that valuation row. Then they capture the land size, may it be in acres or hectares, as it reads on your lease document. Of course, they also look at the property use. Of course, they must describe it, because this will have a big impact when you're calculating for these rates. May it be agriculture, may it be a residential area, may it be industrial, may it be public land. Of course, that use is captured in that valuation role. Then the other thing that they establish is the value of land. And here we are going to look at the different aspects. We are looking at the ground value and the market value. Of course, in that valuation role, they're able to capture the value of this particular piece of land. Basically, what we are talking about here is a database of properties or land that is owned within a particular neighborhood, and this is what we are calling the valuation role. For example, you have a piece of land, maybe in Juja, in Ruiru, Mombasa Road, wherever. So the first thing that the county government will look at is whether this land is a leasehold piece of land. So they will log in it as leasehold, and then they will capture the value, because with their valuers, they're able to know how much piece of land would cost in that particular neighborhood. And then now they feed those details, so that in the subsequent years, as you go back to be able to pay for rates, you don't need to keep registering for those rates. So you basically walk in with maybe your previous receipt of the previous year, and they're able to develop or generate an invoice for the current year. So basically what I'm talking about here is that there's a process and there's a maintained database in the county. Then let me look at what is the valuation role, and I'll maybe keep referring to my notes here to be able to give you the right indications of this terminology. So once the property has been valued, as I discussed earlier, the county government maintains a record. Of course, they don't do the valuation every year after every year. Maybe, I'm not sure how long they will take, but let's say they will take like 5 years, maybe 3 years before they renew the valuation. So within that particular period of time, they'll establish how much a piece of land would cost. May it be industrial, may it be agricultural, may it be residential, so that now they have that rating role, so that when you walk to the county and maybe you own a 50 by 100, they'll be able to extrapolate how much you pay for rates. So basically, from the valuation role, they're able to convert that to a rating role, so that at least when you go there, you are able to get your invoice quite easily. So basically, here we'll be looking at the value of the land, the count rate. Count rate is basically a percentage that they will use to charge, so that they derive how much you pay, and then from that they derive what we are calling the rates payable. So it's basically a 3-level process. Establish how much the piece of land is, then there's an established rate at the county level, may it be 0.05, may it be 1%, and then from that rate they're able to establish how much land rate you pay on a particular year. So basically that's what we are calling the rating role, that when you walk to a sub-county and get an invoice, you basically subject your land ownership on that particular role. Then we also now look at particular aspects as they are doing all these. Someone would ask, if I've developed my piece of land, so which value do they use to charge rates on? Are they looking at the entire value of the land plus the development, or they purely look at the land? And this is where now I'm looking at what I'm calling the site value versus the market value. And when I look at the site value here, I'm basically looking at the value of the land only, and this does not include the houses, does not include the boundary wall, does not include the landscaping, any kind of development that you've put in that particular piece of land. So the site value basically looks at the value of the land alone, minus any development that you've put in that particular land, because it would be unfair for them to charge a rate from the entire value of your development. Of course, that would be very high and would be extreme. So it is basically on the ground value, basically how much the piece of land costs minus the development that have been put on that piece of land. So basically, for example, if your piece of land is, let's say, 6 million, and the development that you've put in that piece of land is basically, let's say, 20 million, they'll consider 6 million, not the total of 6 plus 18. So they will only charge rates based on the land value, that is, in this case, the 6 million. Then what is the market value as per the valuation rule and rating in this case? Basically, now here we are looking at the entire total amount. This is the land value plus the house and all the improvements that you put in that kind of land. So in a rating system, they will not use the market value. As I've said earlier, they will basically focus on the site value, or what we call the ground value of the piece of land. So different counties would have different percentages, and the formula here, we are looking at the land value, okay, the land rate, which gives you the rates payable. Basically, the formula here is actually the land rates is equals to property value times the count rate, and the count rate here may be 1%, it may be 0.05, it may be 2%, and maybe given, let's say it's 1%, and your land value or the site value is 5 million, so it is basically 1% of 5 million, and that gives you 50,000. So in this case, you'll be able to pay 50,000 Kenya shillings worth of rates per year. Of course, rates are paid per year, not per month. So it's an annual rate that you pay once in a year. If your piece of land, let's say it's 20 million, maybe it's an industrial piece of land, and the rates in this case, the rate in this case is 0.05. So it is 0.5% of 20 million, which gives you maybe 100,000. So that's the amount that you pay at the county level. Then, why is it that sometimes, as I said earlier, you'll find maybe your neighbor is paying less than you're paying? What are some of the factors that would come in? Number one is the different land values. Maybe in a neighborhood of 1 kilometer radius, of course, the land in that neighborhood would not be the same price. Maybe there's a guy who is next to the highway, there's a guy who is next to the river, there's a guy who is midway, maybe there's a guy on a different corner where the infrastructure has been delivered, maybe the road is tarmacked on that area, there's power, there's water. So you'll find within that 1 kilometer radius, the land value will be different, because again, there's a guy who has gone ahead and done a change of use, maybe from agriculture to a commercial, to a residential, or to industrial, and maybe your piece of land is still agriculture. So you'll find in a particular neighborhood, despite of you being owners in that particular neighborhood, you'll have different rates payable per year, because number one, on the use of your particular piece of land, okay, or your land is closer to certain amenities, so you find the ground value is higher than your neighbor who is downstream. So that's one aspect. Number two is different plot sizes. Of course, maybe you own an acre, your neighbor owns a quarter, the other neighbor owns an eighth. So basically, the calculated rates will be based on their piece of land. Okay, so of course, if you have 1 acre, your rates will be higher than your neighbor who maybe have half an acre. Okay, of course, there's an aspect of the use, as I said earlier, maybe residential versus commercial. So of course, you'll find a plot that is residential in nature will pay lesser rates than a plot that is commercial in nature, because a commercial in nature plot, you're able to develop more usage in terms of maybe plot ratios and plot coverage. Then, of course, there's an aspect of different valuation dates. It all depends when the county came and developed a rating in that particular area, so that will have an impact on the rates that you pay within a particular year. Of course, there's an aspect of different count rating. As I said, you're in a 1 kilometer radius, but you find your neighbor is on a different county and you're in a different county. So you find different counties have different rating parameters that would impact on the kind of a rate that you pay. So basically, it's good to understand that it's good to pay rates, and it's important. Of course, it helps you to make sure that you make sure that you renew your records at the county level, and it adds up to the ownership of that particular piece of land. And as you do that, it's good to understand what is valuation roll. Basically, this is a database that the county maintains when you register for rates payments, and the rating roll. Rating roll is basically the aspect of the land value, the rate as a percentage, and the rates that are payable. So it is good to understand this. Of course, the other aspect that is also critical to understand is that over and above rates payment, there's one document that when you pay rates, it's also good to procure. And here we are talking about rates clearance certificate. Okay, so this is a certificate that you procure or you get. Even if you'll get once when you register for rates, make sure you get a rates clearance certificate. Even if maybe you get it every 5 years, do get it, so that at least that certificate becomes part of that documentation. So take time to like my page, take time to subscribe, so that is you're able to develop more materials that you can share to more residences in our counties, those who are in diaspora, and also understand why we need to pay rates within our county government. So thank you very much.